Today we'll be finishing my workbook on Ruth, the story of faith, which covers the whole book of Ruth. And looking at the chapters, we have done the first three chapters, which is the first three chapters of Ruth, and told basically the whole story. So now we come to chapter 4, and then we'll also follow up with a Jesus is our kinsman redeemer side note. So let's go to chapter 4. Boaz is kinsman redeemer. Oops, no, we just did that. So next one. Boaz marries Ruth. Ruth chapter 4, 1 through 22. Ruth 4:1. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there, just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. It was at the town gate or city gate where transactions were done. This is where the elders would sit. It was sort of like a city hall, city council, and courtroom all rolled into one. This is mentioned in several places in the Bible, one being Proverbs 31:23. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. Where did Boaz wait for the guardian redeemer? At the town gate. It is interesting that this story is purposely written without naming the second guardian redeemer. In the original language, Boaz says, come over here, Mr. So-and-so, and sit down. The author, probably Samuel, purposely did not record the name of the second redeemer. Obviously, Boaz knows the name of the other guardian redeemer. Why did Boaz go to the town gate to make this transaction? Because that's where transactions are made, where there's witnesses. How many elders Boaz asked to sit nearby? 10. Why did Boaz want the elders there? To be witnesses to the transaction. Ruth 4:3. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here, in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so that I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. Here we see Leviticus 25:25 in action. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. It is probable that Naomi and Elimelech sold the land before they traveled to Moab, but during the year of Jubilee, the male can buy it back or redeem the property from the seller. In this case, Elimelech's nearest relative would need to redeem it. What is Naomi selling? A piece of land. Who is the one with the first right to buy the land? The other relative. If he doesn't buy it, who has second right to buy the land? Boaz. What were the elders there for? To witness that transaction. Has anything been said about Ruth yet? Nope. Ruth 4:4b. I will redeem it, this man said. Then Boaz said, On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the guardian redeemer said, Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. It's interesting how Boaz sets this plot up. All true, but he manipulates the guy. He knows what the guy is interested in and what he's not interested in. Maybe the other guy is already married, and so that would complicate issues, or whatever the situation is, he's not willing to go through with it if it includes Ruth. Was a closer relative initially willing to redeem the land? Yes. Who does Boaz say the closer relative has to acquire or marry if he redeems the land? Ruth, the Moabite. Here we see a number of things in play. First, the secret of Ruth coming to Boaz on the threshing floor the night before has been successfully kept quiet. Second, Boaz reminds this man that Ruth is a Moabite and the widow to the eldest son. Therefore, the law of kinsman redeemer means that he needs to marry her, and the sons he will have from her will be considered Mahlon's sons, and therefore Elimelech's, and not his own. Since Naomi was past childbearing age, no one in the family needed to marry her. What reason does a closer relative give that he cannot redeem the land if marrying Ruth was involved? He might endanger his own estate. We can include by response that the closer relative is already married. But in the case of guardian redeemer, that was not a valid excuse not to marry a widow of the family, as evidenced by the writer not including his name in the story. Upon rejecting the purchase of the property, what does the closer relative tell Boaz to do? You can redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. Why did Boaz present first the land to purchase and then added the marriage to Ruth after the closer relative said yes? To see if he had to go further. If the guy wanted the land, he could go further and explain that Ruth was part of the land. If he said no, he didn't have to explain about Ruth. Ruth 4:7. Now, in early in times of Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to be final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to another. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Removing one's sandal, removing something that was part of the person and giving it to another, symbolically expressed ceding a person's right of ownership. This ritual had already stopped by the time of the writer wrote the story of Ruth, but it was happening still in time of Ruth. How was the transfer of property legalized in times of Ruth and Boaz? Giving a sandal. Who removed a sandal? The guardian redeemer that had first option. Who did he give it to? Boaz. Aside from the sandal, what else was there to prove the transaction was legitimate? The 10 elders. What did the closer relative tell Boaz to do regarding the property in Ruth? Buy it yourself, he said. This is what Boaz wanted all along. How did he set up the situation so that he could marry Ruth? Make sure that the other guy doesn't obtain her by setting up the situation where the guy releases his right to have her. But he also keeps secret that she has worked for him and she slept on the threshing floor with him. Ruth 4:9. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, today you are witnesses that I've bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I've also acquired Ruth, the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. What all did Boaz get in the transaction? Property of Elimelech and also Ruth. In the same way, Jesus bought the earth in order to obtain his bride. Matthew 13:44. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. Revelations 5:9. And they sang a new song, saying, you were worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased it for God's persons from every from God. You purchased from God persons from every tribe, language, people, and nation. Ruth 4:11. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring of the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Boaz is blessed by the elders and the people for acting as kinsman redeemer for Elimelech's family. The blessing the people gave Boaz came in 3 parts. What is the first part of the blessing? May the woman become like Rachel and Leah, who built up the family of Israel. Rachel and Leah gave birth to the 12 tribes of Israel. In this blessing, they're wishing Boaz and Ruth have many children. What is the second blessing? May you have standing in Ephrathah to be famous in Bethlehem. This comes true as they are ancestors to King David and eventually to the Messiah. What's the third part of the blessing? That the offspring may be like Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Actually, the story of Tamar is also a story of kinsman redeemer in Genesis 38:27 through 30. Perez, her son, is the ancestor of the Bethlehem people. In this blessing, they're praying for a nation to be built from the offspring of Boaz and Ruth, which is also true. Ruth 4:13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The woman said to Naomi, Praise be the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. Was Ruth able to conceive a son? Yes. Remember, Ruth did not have any children in Mahlon, and yet God enables her to conceive right away with Boaz. God always knows the right time to have a child, as this line, will be special. Who did the women of the town praise? Praised Naomi. This son will be considered to be from the line of Amalek. Although we know little about this son's life, his line will become quite famous. What comparison did the women give for Ruth's love for Naomi? In Ruth's devotion to Naomi and to God of Israel, she enriched Naomi's living situation. According to the women, 7 sons could not have provided as much riches and happiness as Ruth has provided to Naomi. Ruth 4:16. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him, and the women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Who cared for the baby boy? Naomi. Who named the boy? The women living there. What was the boy's name? Obed. Obed is short for Obadiah and means servant of Yahweh. Who is Obed's son? Jesse, and Obed's grandson is David. Looking back at the blessing that Boaz originally gave Ruth, how has it come true? Back to 12. I think I mentioned this when we first came in. Let's see, I think it's right. Perhaps here? 2:12. May the Lord repay you for what you've done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. So, looking back at the blessing that Boaz originally gave Ruth, it's under his wings that she gets refuge, and it all comes true. Now, this is why we figure that it is Samuel who wrote this, because he was alive during the time of David. Ruth 4:8. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Minadab. Minadab the father of Nishon. Nishon the father of Salmon. Salmon the father of Boaz. Boaz the father of Obed. Obed the father of Jesse. And Jesse the father of David. And yeah. And when we get to number 7, I think you'll figure out what I was promising you in the first chapter is why why Boaz is so open to a woman of foreign birth. But who does the author start the family line with? Perez. Perez's story is written in Genesis 38. Who is Perez's son? Hezron. Nothing else is known about this man. Who is Hezron's son? Ram. Sometimes his name is listed as Aram. Nothing else is known about this man. Who is Ram's son? Abinadab. Nothing else is known about him. Who's Abinadab's son? Nishon. Nishon was considered the leader of the tribe of Judah during his time, Numbers 2:3. Who is Nishon's son? Salmon. Salmon married Rahab, the harlot of Jericho. Matthew 1:5, Joshua 2:6. And who is Salmon and Rahab's son? Boaz. So now you can understand why Boaz was more open to a woman of foreign birth, because his mother was from Jericho, and she was of foreign birth, but she came in part of Israel. Her story's in Joshua, and so that's how that all works. So who is Boaz and Ruth's great-grandson? Be David. Great-grandson. Maybe David. David is who I was trying to think of. Oh, Boaz and Ruth. Yes, great-grandson, David. The writer of the story, we presume it was Samuel, thought the story was great due to the connection to David, the king. But who else will come from this line? Jesus, the Messiah. Do you think Boaz's acceptance of Ruth being a Moabite was easier because his mom was also not an Israelite? Definitely. Definitely. So that's the end of that chapter, but I also have this side note. The stories of the Old Testament are said to symbolically represent Jesus, his role, or the events of the New Testament. In the story of Ruth, we can easily see Jesus as our kinsman redeemer. The kinsman redeemer had to be a family member. Jesus saw his believers as brothers and sisters, and we see that in Matthew 12, 48, 50. He replied to him, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" According to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." Number 2, the kinsman redeemer had the duty of buying family members out of slavery. Jesus redeemed us from slavery to sin and death. Romans 6, 17 and 18. But thanks be to God that, although you used to be slaves to sin, you have come to obey from your heart the pattern of teaching that has now claimed your allegiance. You have now been set free from sin. Number 3, the kinsman redeemer had the duty of buying back land that had been forfeited. Jesus would redeem the earth that mankind sold over to Satan. Revelations 5:9. And they sang a new song saying, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain. With your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe, language, people, and nation." 4, Boaz's kinsman redeemer to Ruth was not motivated by self-interest, but motivated by love for Ruth. Jesus' motivation for redeeming us is his great love for us. John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. 5, Boaz's kinsman redeemer to Ruth took her as his bride. The people Jesus has redeemed are collectively called his bride. 2 Corinthians 11:2. I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. I promised you one husband, to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to him. And 6, Boaz, as kinsman redeemer to Ruth, provided a glorious destiny for Ruth. Jesus, as our redeemer, provides a glorious destiny for us. Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. And all this is adapted from Pastor David Gusick of Calvary Chapel. So that ends my book on Ruth, and I hope you enjoyed it. It is quite a good book, actually, of romance and love and kinsman redeemer.